RJ Smilac.
Isabel Fleechak.
In 2018, there were more deaths caused by the 9/11 illness than there were in the actual attacks. This information comes from Nancy Cutler, who has a Master of Science in Journalism from Columbia University, in a Mount Sinai report published in 2018.
All of us have heard of the September 11th attacks. They leave a legacy on the United States and our nation and the world.
The September 11th attacks have made a lasting impact on our lives and history as a nation.
First, we will look at the planning that went into the September 11th attacks. Then, we will look at the people involved in the attacks. We will then look at the events that occurred on that fateful day.
Then we will talk about how they affect our everyday lives, and lastly, how they are memorialized. Many of us know what happened on September 11th, although what many of us do not know is the horrible attacks that were planned before. In 1996, Khalid Mohammed went to Osama bin Laden to discuss. This is according to Oliver Berkman, a British journalist for the New York Times with a degree from Cambridge University from the journal Terrorism, published in December of 2003. There were originally 10 planes planned for the attack. Khalid Mohammed went to Osama bin Laden and asked him for the money and the operatives for these attacks. This only shows 3 planes, although there was originally 10 planes. There was 5 planes supposed to go to the east coast, and there was 5 planes supposed to go to the west. Osama bin Laden had picked 2 Saudi Arabians, and he had also picked 2 Yemens. Only 2 Saudi Arabians were the ones who went into the attacks. The 2 Saudi Arabians hit the Pentagon, although the Yemens did not make it. This was because they were unable to obtain visas. These 4 men went to Afghanistan in 1999 for training at Osama bin Laden's camps. They learned commando skills rather than jet plane, and they learned how to blend into society. Many people think that the reason that these terrorists risked their lives was because of their religion, to sacrifice themselves for Allah. Although there were many different people picked from many different countries before, but Osama bin Laden thought it would be wise to only have Saudi Arabians. This was because they could easily obtain visas. Now we will talk about the people involved in the attacks.
Several key figures were involved in the September 11th attacks and their follow-up. The first of these key figures is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, often referred to as KSM. According to the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, the primary congressional committee responsible for investigating the 9/11 attacks, in the report titled Al-Qaeda Takes Aim at the American Homeland, published December 2018, KSM was the model of a terroristic entrepreneur. His previous plots included car bombings, political assassinations, airplane hijackings, airplane bombings, and reservoir poisoning. Because of his work in the September 11th attacks, as well as his previous works, he quickly took the interest of the United States and several other governments across the globe and was arrested in 2003 and detained in Guantanamo Bay Detention Center, where he remains to this day, awaiting charges on, amongst other things, airplane hijackings, genocide against Americans, and conspiracy to commit mass murder. KSM also took the interest of Osama bin Laden and the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda due to his skills in planning previous terroristic attacks. Taken to Afghanistan, he was given the money and tools necessary to plan the attacks. Al-Qaeda was the other key figure in planning the 9/11 attacks. The primary person responsible for this was Osama bin Laden, who used his vast wealth and political connections to secure the funding, as well as passports and other items for the attackers themselves. Osama bin Laden used his political connections, primarily within the Saudi Arabian government, to provide passports and other visas used for the attackers to enter the United States prior to the attacks, but also for them to board the airlines on the day of the attacks. The next group of people who's important to understand within the 9/11 attacks were the crew and passengers of Flight 93. According to Garrett M. Graff, an author and journalist with over 20 years experience reporting on political topics, in his book titled The Only Plane in the Sky, An Oral History Anniversary of 9/11, published in September of 2019, Flight 93 was unique to the other attacks compared on 9/11, as due to the later timing of the flight, they had received information from the ground through phone and radio calls that planes were being hijacked on the day. Because they assumed that a hijacking could take place, and correctly believing that one had taken place, they quickly plotted, while still under the careful watch of their hijackers, a plan to storm the cockpit and take back control of the airplane and land it at a nearby airport. They were successful in executing their plan, but unfortunately the terrorists put the plane into an unrecoverable dive and the plane crashed into the ground. Although they were unsuccessful in bringing the plane to the ground safely, the crew and passengers of Flight 93 are often described as heroes for preventing a fourth attack on the United States. It is expected that this attack would have hit the White House or another critical target within the Washington, D.C. area. Now that we understand the people and plans involved in the 9/11 attacks, let's look at how these unfolded on that fateful day.
9/11 was a day that changed the world forever. David Schapper, who has a bachelor's degree in mass communication and history from the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse and a master's in public affairs reporting from the University of Illinois Springfield, in a journal from IdeaStream Public Media published in September 2021, explained that before the day the 19 hijackers exploited our poor security system, everyone could go through security with no ID, no boarding pass, or questions asked. After 9/11, the days of showing up to your flight at the last minute and going through a simple metal detector were over. In 2001, security was done by private contractors. They were hired by airlines with few federal standards. Security was meant to be invisible as to not interfere with airport or aircraft operations. The hijackers of Al-Qaeda used this to their advantage at Boston Logan Airport, Newark's Liberty Airport, and Dulles International Airport. Sure, security wasn't the greatest, but how did all 19 hijackers make it through metal detectors with deadly weapons? Well, some of them were flagged and selected for additional security, but they were eventually cleared. They were armed with knives and razor blades, and in 2001, up to 4-inch knives were allowed, so even if they were caught, the knives would have been returned. By 8 a.m., all 19 hijackers defeated all security measures that the American civil aviation system had in place to prevent a hijacking. We all know what happens next. The hijacked planes flew into the Pentagon in Washington, D.C., a field in Pennsylvania, and the Twin Towers in New York City. Police officers, firefighters, and ordinary people risked their lives to save others. Let's look into ways that some people around the World Trade Center found safety. Thousands of people evacuated Manhattan on boats. James Kendra, a professor in the School of Public Policy at the University of Delaware, and Tricia Wachendorf, a professor of sociology at the University of Delaware, in a book review of American Dunkirk, The Waterborne Evacuation of Manhattan on 9/11, published in September 2017, states that this was the largest maritime evacuation in American history. Many different types of boats were used in this evacuation, including ferries, tugboats, dinner cruises, and sightseeing boats. They would pick people up in Manhattan and drop them off in Staten Island or New Jersey. The workers of these boats knew the waterways well and used that to their advantage. Ferries did what they normally did, just with more distress. And tugboats that were supposed to be used for things like oil spills brought medical supplies. The workers of these boats were all civilians with no formal training or instruction. They were also all volunteers that saw the evacuees along the waterfront their priority. They were organized and efficient, using skills they had developed throughout their career to work towards a common goal. Now that we know what happened on 9/11, we can now look into the after effects of that infamous day.
The 9/11 attacks continue to affect our everyday lives. According to William Galston, who has his PhD from University of Chicago and the journal from Brookings, published in September 2021, states that a minority of civilians still cannot take an airplane across seas. They will not gather in large groups and do not feel comfortable in any kind of activities. They also stated that 46% of Americans feel that the 9/11 attacks changed America for the worst. They also stated that 30% of Americans feel safer now that the TSA has been
implied. TSA stands for Transportation Security Administration. According to David Pioski, who has his master's degree in business administration and public administration in a publication for Transportation Security Administration, updated in 2022, states that bottles larger than 32 ounces cannot be carried in your carry-on, and you also have to have small containers. If you are 18 years or older, you also need to have a valid identification in order to get through airport security. David Pioski, who has his master's degree in business administration and public administration in a publication for Transportation Security Administration, updated in 2022, states that there were many bombs that tried to get through TSA security and were actually successful. This is the shoe bomb that was tried by Richard Reed in 2001. We have the 2006 liquid explosives. There was 10 aircrafts found with those. And then we have the underwear bomb for 2009, tried by Faruko Talib, and they all were successful to get through security, but they eventually got caught. Now that we understand the everyday effects, let's look at what we do to commemorate the victims.
Throughout the years, there have been many tributes made to commemorate the victims of the 9/11 attacks. There are three main memorials that are attributed to these. The first one is the Pentagon. This one is to commemorate the 184 victims that were in and on the plane at the Pentagon. The youngest person on Flight 77 was 3 years old, and the oldest being 77. The rest of the victims were inside the Pentagon and also lost their lives as the building was burning. The wings of the memorials have each victim's name on it, and if it's facing in towards the Pentagon, that stands for the 59 people that were on the plane that lost their lives, and the wings facing out stand for the people that were in the Pentagon that lost their lives. The next memorial is the tribute in light. This memorial is 2 big squares with blue beams in place of the Twin Towers that had fallen. According to Jenny Pachuki, a professor in history at Wagner College and a content strategist for the Tribute in Light from the 9/11 Memorial Museum, published in 2021, there were 3,000 people that lost their lives in the Twin Tower attacks, and much more helped, which is what this memorial is for. This memorial first started as a temporary thing, but soon gained a lot of attraction and is now lit annually on 9/11. The last memorial is the Flight 93 Field of Honor. This one is to commemorate the victims on Flight 93 that stopped the hijackers from getting to their final destination and landing in the field. According to Andrew Beckstoffer, a board member at the National Park Service and a publication by the National Park Service in 2022, states that this memorial is in the shape of a circle to show the impact that the plane had on the field and its surroundings. There's a wall of names at this memorial that lists every person on the plane that lost their lives, and a tower of voices, which has a wind chime for every person that died.
First, we talked about the planning involved before the attacks. Second, we talked about the people involved in the attacks.
We then look at the events that occurred on that fateful day. We then discussed how the attacks continue to affect our everyday lives, and finally, the way the attacks continue to be memorialized to this day.
The September 11th attacks have had a lasting impact on our lives and history as a nation. There has been more deaths from